Welcome everyone. Last year, I went through and completed Yu-Gi-Oh! Forbidden Memories, one of the most challenging Yu-Gi-Oh! Games on the market. With its obscene power spikes, unique gameplay, and the AI seeming to be one step ahead of you, it's a bit of a rough time unless you decide to spam the endless army of twin-headed thunder dragons. Still, nonetheless, I have a soft spot for this game. While going through some of the other ideas for playthroughs for my TCG channel, link in the description below. Please go check it out and subscribe, would mean the world to me. Someone reminded me about Yu-Gi-Oh! Reshef of Destruction. For those who don't know, this is a sequel to the Game Boy Advance game Yu-Gi-Oh! The Sacred Cards. Yu-Gi-Oh! The Sacred Cards takes place during Battle City, where you play as a new character. Friends to well-known characters such as Yugi, Joey, Taya, and the works. Encountering villains like Merrick Ishtar, the Rare Hunters, and I guess anti-hero Seto Kaiba. It pretty much plays out the whole Battle City arc, where you end up taking down Yami Merrick as opposed to Yuki, while collecting the God cards. Being brought up to speed with Yu-Gi-Oh! Sacred Cards, let's dive into Yu-Gi-Oh! Reshef of Destruction's story. This takes place shortly after, where all of a sudden the Millennium items are stolen, the God cards are turned to stone, and a dark force is trying to revive Reshef, a powerful entity of destruction that's trying to destroy the world, in which we are needed to gather all the Millennium items and restore the God cards to stop them. We enlist the help of Yugi and Joey, primarily who follow us along with the assistance of Shizu Ishtar, Merrick's sister from the first game. Shizu sends us all over the world to retrieve the items. And of course, we just simply can't grab them. That'd be too easy. No. So we have to challenge other players vastly stronger than ourselves according to the ancient rules and collect them from the Guardians. I'm not going to cover the entire story of the game, since I personally think it's one of the cooler aspects of the game, but I will touch on various points of interest that stand out well, leaving only minor spoilers. Also, just to be aware, the story sets up a formula for the most part. Guardian has something that you want, you go to them, you have to face some duelists in the way, both from the source material and not, defeat the Guardian, you get the item, you go back to Ishizu, rinse and repeat, she tells you where to go. For like quite a while. Though every now and then there is a small break here and there, which does provide a bit of fresh air for the experience. Starting off, what did I like about the game? Well, besides the moment it was f***ing over, I like the story. It takes itself in a different direction, utilizing many characters from the Duelist Kingdom and Battle City arc, which has some interesting turns regarding what happens to the ghouls after Battle City and some old characters we never heard from originally. It gives them another chance to breathe new life into something that would have been pretty cool to see animated, whether it been a separate season spinoff or even an OVA. Of course, being Yu-Gi-Oh! The Sacred Cards sequel, the gameplay brings back the advantage and disadvantage types. I'm all for it. This is something that Yu-Gi-Oh! Dark Duel Stories, the Sacred Cards, and Reshef share something special and helps establish different deck theories between the rule changes and its own personal identity. Another cool aspect in this game in terms of story is how well it tries to capture some of the anime moments in the story as side stories. For example, remember that one episode where Tem and Taya go on a date? And that one musician tries to take Taya away? Yeah, that's in here. Also remember Rebecca Hawkins tried to appear to challenge Kaiba for the Blue Eyes White Dragon? And of course, Tristan turning into a monkey during the Virtual World arc? Yeah, that's all here. Sadly, I kinda missed them and only learned of them while writing and recording for this review. Big L on my part for that. Legend has it to this day, Tristan still hasn't gotten his body back because Metallic neglected to do that. Most of the areas aren't just recycled either from the previous game. We got a bunch of new areas all around the world during our Tour of Ages. Most sequels can sometimes just play it safe in the lazy approach and just reuse everything, but to its credit, Reshef only shares a handful of similar locations to its predecessor. Also, the game uses new sprites during the conversation section, and of course with newly added cards, some currently and for the longest time were only available to this game. So let's address the elephant in the room. What's the biggest problem with this game? Story seems pretty standard with some fire moments, right? Well, it's getting through the story is the issue. With Sacred Cards, progression was so much more streamlined and realistic. Reshef of Destruction, winning a duel, gets you 3 points for your deck capacity at most, for story heavy related duels, and 1 point for repeat duels and everything else. While in Sacred Cards, boss duels will yield you 30 points. 30! Think of it! Basically, you get 10 duels of boss duels in one go comparing the two. And if you don't get 30, you're likely to get 5 or less points, which makes it still much easier to add powerful cards to your deck. With Reshef having the much limited reward, this basically increasing the amount of time spending to make your deck stronger. The fact that this becomes a huge factor into grinding just makes it more of a tedious task and just not fun, because the game already is against you in so many other different aspects. You can always make the argument that you can focus on changing your deck every time in order to counter your opponent. Since this game borrows the advantage-disadvantage from Sacred Cards, it's true to some extent. However, in the game, the amount of variety of the NPC's deck has increased from the Sacred Cards. So that concept will only get so far, considering the base value of their attack cards can far outpace your own for nearly all of the game. Sometimes they may only throw out fiends, so light monsters are the way to go. However, the moment they send out something else, you're cooked. Generally speaking, your monster attack values and defense values will be below your opponents for the majority of the game. So having to rely on type advantages is going to be your main saving grace unless you're able to bust out a tribute summon monster and hope that it can withstand anything your opponent summons out in terms of type advantage and disadvantage. Personally, with my playthrough, trap cards were a serious powerhouse for the longest time. I would recommend running as many battle traps as you can considering your limited deck capacity, which these traps have a lot of bang for their buck. I should also mention a few weird concepts Reshef of Destruction that further cements being against you. Once you beat a non-playable character, you could pretty much never duel them again until much later on. So beat them while you can to obtain the 3 points over the usual 1. However, you can duel Tristan, Duke, Yugi, and Joey and some other main cast characters as often as you like, in your grandpa's shop or in the overworld, in which most cases they drop 1 point per win, along with some money and a chance for a decent card you can either add to your deck, or what I would often do, resell it to grandpa. Also, your life points, yeah, they don't go back to 8,000 after a duel. The only way to recover your life points is to go back to your home and save on your computer. To me, this is a weird rule. I mean, I guess it makes it more difficult when you have back-to-back duels, but isn't that kind of cheating? Like, can you imagine if you're at a YCS and you're in the top 32 with less than 3,000 life points because you can't log into your Windows computer at home? Wild. The password machine makes a return, but at a cost, a big one. Just using the machine itself costs $1,000, but hey, you get a card that you want, right?
Wrong, sir. Wrong.
Well, yes and no. So using the password machine allows you to add the card to Grandpa's Moto shop, and then you still have to buy it. Any card worth running in your deck will cost upwards of like $3,000. Considering each duel against Yugi or Joey nets you around 80 bucks on average, you can see how this will take a while to secure a new card worthy of using. Though, word of advice, if you ever find yourself in need of money early on, I would recommend starting off dueling Duke Devlin or Tristan early on. They're relatively easy once you get your deck somewhat running, and they have a chance of dropping some pretty good 700 attack point-ish monsters of different types, and some powerful spells you can use later on like Heavy Storm and Pot of Greed, which you can then take your duplicate copies and sell them at the store for more money. It's a bit of a grind, but it's an honest way to make a living during dark times. You also didn't mishear on that. You can only sell cards you have multiple copies of in your trunk. I don't really agree with this, but it is what it is. Another pro tip I might add that I didn't take advantage of this, very related to the game, when you can, use the password system to get Dark Flare Knight as soon as possible and add it to your deck when you can. The reason being, if you send him to the graveyard, which in this game you can discard any cards or tribute monsters without even summoning or permanent effect, it will trigger his effect. First, he will summon a Mirage Knight in its place, a Drain type monster with 2,800 attack points. And then at the end of your turn, he splits into Dark Magician and the Flame Swordsman. This is kinda dumb, but I love it at the same time. Often at times, you'll find yourself needing to break the system and cheese the game. You can also do this trick by obtaining the Winged Dragon of Ra Phoenix mode by sending him to the graveyard the same way. Then this will summon the base Winged Dragon of Ra to your field with 4,000 attack. Honestly, this is what actually gave me some hope to finally take down the final boss. Aside from the game being a huge grind fest, the difficulty is all over the place. The fact we have deck capacity and duelist level to contend with, but our opponents don't, is just rubbing salt in an open wound. One of the most intense duel in the game was against none other than the Merrick Ishtar. And no, this time he really wasn't a whining villain, but tests you to see if you're worthy of the Winged Dragon of Ra. And I'm not ashamed to admit this, but this duel literally took me hours to complete. The reason being is that these later bosses, their monsters will often exceed 1,800 attack points, while having some of the most powerful spell and traps in the game at multiple copies. We're talking like several Heavy Storm, which in this game blows up the entire board, Pot of Greed, which to this day I don't know what it does, and Swords of Revealing Light, which is one of the most worst cards they can play against you because they can often top deck something that they need to break your board or steal advantage from the game. Plus, from what I can tell, they don't have to follow the unspoken forbidden limited list like we do. Oh yeah, did I mention you only have some cards at 1 per copy? Like Dark Flare Knight and Pot of Greed. This makes sense if it was a universal thing, but sometimes I've had my opponent drop several Swords of Revealing Lights or Pot of Greeds, only to delay me from taking their life points for them to eventually drop a Regeki. It's a painful moment that I try not to relive through. Not only are the boss's decks super stacked, they also kind of cheat even in the game rules. Well, let me explain. You, in a perfect world, will start off with 8,000 life points, assuming you haven't taken any damage or just left your PC at home. Some of your opponents will actually start with 20,000 life points. Like, no joke. The final 2 bosses who are back to back with no healing or time in between to edit your decks have 20,000 life points and then 40,000 life points. This is insane. They already have some of the strongest decks in the game, but the fact you have to beat them both in a row with no recovery or any time to modify your deck in between is absurd. Thankfully, their deck monsters aren't too different. With enough determination and of course slamming down the Winged Dragon of Ra and praying that they don't summon a god card of their own or beat Ra by battle, you're good. In addition, the limited list being an unspoken rule is just weird. Learn until the final gauntlet is that the god cards are actually unaffected by his traps, spells, and effects. I really wish I knew this from the get-go, don't get me wrong. The god cards are always in my deck anyway because they cost 0 and thankfully are not hard to get out if you run a bunch of Dorons or other monster summoning effect cards like Toadmaster. But the fact that the game itself has unspoken rules just seems a bit unfair, like it's withholding information. I don't recall anywhere where the game states they're immune to these or there's a limited semi-limited list. If I'm wrong though, let me know in the comment section below. All in all, Reshef of Destruction, as a frustrating game as it is, I still found myself enjoying the story and the gameplay when it did play to somewhat to a fair level. Although those moments were far and few between, Konami did set themselves out to make something more difficult than the sacred cards because of the feedback that the game was too easy. This is basically the moment where Konami just said, hold my drink, and provides to give us a borderline unfair challenge that I suppose you could call the Souls-like of Yu-Gi-Oh games.
He said it! He said it!
If you attempt this game, understand it will be a challenge borderline nearly impossible unless the stars align. However, when it's all said and done, you'll feel accomplished, knowing it's over, and just appreciate for what the game provided in terms of a challenge. At least that's what I tell myself. I can never see myself going back to the base game again, not with how brutal it is. From trying to get up to par with where you need to be and along the way with what gets thrown into you, it just doesn't seem worth it to me these days. Thanks for watching, everyone. For now, this will probably be the last Yu-Gi-Oh game I review for a while. At least until the early day collection drops, whenever that is. Then I might, dust it off and do another one. I will be doing a Yu-Gi-Oh! Legacy of the Duelist Link Evolution playthrough on my other TCG channel if you want to join in and watch me tackle the history of the animes in somewhat of a visual novel settings. Hit like and subscribe, and I will see you later.